Welcome, everyone. My name is Jennifer Nava-Melican. I'm the director of the Center for Art in Wood. And we're looking forward to spending the next hour with you for our 5th installment of the Young Artist Speaker Series, in which artists and makers share their career paths, however circuitous they might be. As we welcome tonight's speaker, Danielle Rose Byrd, I also want to invite you to enjoy our new exhibition, Spoons to Stir the Soul, the World of Norm Sartorius. We don't always have confluence between our Young Artist Speaker Series and our exhibition programming, and we certainly don't necessarily plan for that, but you'll see that this time there are threads that connect. And both artists show us, among other things, how artists and makers can create beautiful things for use and inspiration in gentle coexistence with the natural world. With that said, we can learn from this practice as well as commit to learning the history of the original stewards of the land we sit on, the Lenape. And we should also advocate for the recognition of their sovereignty. I'm going to put a link in the chat where you can learn more about the history of the Lenape people. And while I do that, Katie Sorensen, the Center's Director of Outreach and Communications, will introduce the star of tonight's show. Before she does that, one thing, don't forget to turn on your live captioning if you're aided by having captions in type in front of you while you're watching, and feel free to add your comments and questions to the chat as we go. All right, Katie, it's all yours. You're muted.
I thought I was a professional. I guess I'm not.
Happens to everyone.
Well, welcome everyone. Tonight is one of my favorite speaker series that the center offers, and that is the Young Artist Speaker Series. Tonight we're featuring Danielle Rose Byrd, and this series is offered each semester in the spring and in the fall, and we feature a young artist who shares their work and speaks about their transition from academia or whatever path they were on to becoming an independent artist focused on the material of wood. So I would like to introduce tonight's featured artist. Danielle Rose Byrd is a self-taught wood carver and sculptor living and working in Bar Harbor, Maine. At College of the Atlantic, she explored music and sound sculpture, and while building a handmade fiddle-ish instrument constructed from burnt pile wood found on campus, began carving scraps into spoons. Spoons, right there, key word. She has written for various magazines and journals, and from 2014 to 2017 was a member of Lie-Nielsen Toolworks, traveling the country teaching hand tool woodworking fundamentals. In 2018, she was awarded the Belvedere Handcraft Fellowship by the Maine Arts Commission. Her book, The Handcarved Bowl, was published in 2021. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Danielle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Very honored to be included in this and to talk more about I'm glad you said circuitous, because that very much fits the bill for the route I took. You know, my bio sort of covered a little bit of it, that I did a little bit of sculpture work and exploration in college. And for those not familiar, College of the Atlantic is a school that doesn't have majors per se. They have one, it's called human ecology, which is basically another way to say interdisciplinary degree. So you can go there and focus on something and take a lot of classes in whatever field you want. But you can also self-direct, you can create classes. And so I very much took advantage of that. And it took a little while for me to realize what I wanted to be doing. And I think, you know, in talking with a lot of other artists too, that sometimes it only happens in retrospect that we realize that we were sort of on this path the whole time. I originally went to school pre-med. I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. And I went to school in New York for a year. And I was telling Nava, I actually moved there 10 days before September 11th happened. And it really just, it hit me at this very, very, sort of opportune moment in a way where I had the ability to very, very early in my career reassess on a big level, like what I wanted to be doing. And I was like, wow, I don't have a lot of time. And if I do this, I have the next 15 years planned. And do I really want that? And it was like a very clear no. And so I moved back to Maine and I went to college in Atlantic and I was like, I'm going to study music. Have I ever studied music? No. Will they let me? Yes. So I did it. I still don't know how to read music to this day. And as I was studying music, I realized that I really wanted to build things as well. And when I was a kid, I was sort of that kid who was like just using whatever was around, snow, trash, wood, found objects and making things. And I started sort of doing that at COA, at College of the Atlantic as well. And realized that towards the end, that I actually wanted to do more with sculpture than I wanted to do with music. And I started building, one of the classes that I actually built for myself was with a drumming teacher. And we would go to the town dump every Saturday. And the guys started to like get to know us and they would save us cool stuff. Like there was very much like the culture of the transfer station is, I love it. Like there's just like this whole other world there. And we would collect things. And then I did a installation where I suspended this whole sort of drumming sculpture in between two trees. And then I started getting into wood carving because we were right on the beach. Our campus is literally on the beach. I say beach, it's Maine, it's more like rock. But finding driftwood and just whatever I could get my hands on and started carving. And I started doing my senior project, which I always forget is actually very close by. We talked about that fiddle-ish instrument and it is here. So this is what I made for we call it senior project. It's really only a 10-week sort of thing. And this was from burn pile material. So this was next to the buildings and grounds department, which was like literally 3 men. Like it was a school with like 250 kids. Like this wasn't a huge thing going on. And I had no money. I had no tools. And they sort of took me under their wing and they gave me a key to the buildings and grounds department. And they said, don't kill yourself, was basically like the parameters of, don't be dumb, use these tools wisely, and you can have any of the burned stuff that we've taken from any of the buildings. And so I started to make that. And, it fused sort of the sculpture and the music thing that I was doing. And as I was doing that, I started carving a spoon with a very dull, like didn't even think that sharpening was necessary after buying it from the hardware store, like flat, inch wide chisel. Don't know how I made it happen. I think a lot of sandpaper came into play. And oddly enough, it was like the last 3 weeks of school. And I was like, ooh, I found the thing, like, yeah, kind of like went through my fingertips feeling like I could have really explored something sculpturally on an academic level. I definitely did not have the money to go back to school. I was eyeballs deep in debt. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to kind of put that on the back burner. And the debt actually took me by surprise. It was not something I anticipated. I came from a very chaotic, abusive, not healthy home life. I'm originally from Western Maine. It's a very sort of isolated town. It's called Rumford for anyone that's familiar. It's a dying paper mill town with a high rate of poverty, mental illness, drugs, alcohol addictions, and crime, but has sort of an Appalachian feel, but very isolated unto itself, sort of in the middle of Western Maine. And my parents signed me up for an incredible amount of debt that I was unaware of. And so when I graduated college, actually 4 days before I graduated college, I was told what that number was because I had not known. It was kept from me. And so I had just found this thing that I really wanted to do. I was considering, like, can I go to grad school for sculpture? Can I do this other thing? And it was quickly like, wow, okay, I have to really reassess like what I can do here, like what's possible. And so, sorry, my cat's sneezing at the most, like the linchpin of the story. And so I had to go quickly reassess, like, wow, my life is going to be very, very different. Like, I don't have any connections. I don't know where the next step is. I'm clearly going to have to get like a minimum wage job working service because I live, COA is in Bar Harbor where I live now. And it's a very seasonal community with a lot of service jobs in the summer. And so I knew instantly, like, this is what I'm going to have to do. I also found out soon after that my father was the co-signer on the loan, which meant that he was an incredibly violent, volatile, and unpredictable person. And so I instantly knew, and he had really taken a dive in that respect, mentally. And so I knew that if he was a co-signer on my loans, that meant that I had to really be on these, or else I wasn't quite sure what he was capable of. And so it put my life in this, but I just had to rearrange things like substantially, realizing that it was going to look different for a very long time and not at all how I envisioned. So what I've always been good at, though, and because of where I came from, I'm an incredibly resourceful person. And also what I sort of built as my strength, even while studying at COA and sort of finding out what I wanted, was just, I could take driftwood, I could take a chunk of wood, whatever was free, basically, I could find a way to make that work. And so I knew that that was sort of the way that I had to go because I had no other option. So I was working a lot, like basically working and sleeping. Like that was what I was doing for almost 15 years. I graduated in 2005. So I'm not, divorced from this, it's only been a couple of years since I've paid off my loans. And I'll give that away. I've paid them off. Woo-hoo, yeah, they're done. And so that, of course, is like a huge weight off of a person that attached to me in a way I did not ask for, in a multitude of ways, and a person who I was trying to separate myself from, and I couldn't for a long time, and I wasn't sure what would happen if I didn't pay those loans. Like, I quite frankly thought he was going to hunt me down. And so it's really, really hard to be like, how am I going to expand creatively when you're just pressed down from all angles, emotionally and physically, and just drained. But again, I'm really resourceful. And so I just started figuring out, okay, well then what can I do? There's a lot of what I can't do. Let's find all the little pockets of what I can do. And so I was working constantly in the service industry, doing a variety of jobs and also other random ones. Like I managed a dog kennel, like a sled dog kennel. What? Like that happened. I took it. It was great. And I just put every cent I had into the student loan so I could be free of my father, quite frankly. And if I had any extra money, it was like $10 a month, maybe, like nothing. And so I realized that free material was the only way I was going to get there. And living in Maine, there's a good amount of wood around if you're looking for it. And I realized that green wood carving, even though I didn't know that's what it was even called at the time, required very little tools, and you could do quite a bit with only a few. And I started to research online. I went into like deep into like woodworking forums, and before the internet was like really developed enough. This is only maybe 10 years ago, where I was just finding all the little things that I could like ILL books, or, you know, because I didn't even own a car. So I was having to like walk to the library. I would like log on for like the 20-minute slot that they give me, and then be like, how do I find this? You know, and I would come prepped with questions so I could best utilize those 20 minutes. And I slowly, it feels quite similar to the paperclip game or whatever it is, where you trade up. We have a paperclip and you trade up for a little bit more and a little bit more. It felt like a 15-20 year long paperclip game of being like, how do I leverage this tiny little thing that I have into something that's just a little bit more? And then how do I leverage it? And it's just constant. And I learned a lot about carving tools. And I happened to learn about this one guy, Nick Westerman, who's in Wales. And he was making these apparently incredible carving knives. And I'd see like 1 or 2 pictures in these forums where I was like, okay, I get a good general gist. I'm trying to learn like why they're so special. And this was right at the time where I paid off one of my loans. So I was able to quit one job. And when I did that, it just so happens that Lie-Nielsen, which is a hand tool company that's very well known in the woodworking world, and they just so happen to be, their headquarters are 2 hours away from my house. And so they were having an open house, and I was like, I'm gonna go. I can finally go. Like, anyone who's worked in the service industry and who's had student loans or whatever knows that they will never have a weekend free ever, ever, forever in your life. And this was like the first weekend I had free. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do with it. And I went, and they had a bunch of these carving tools. And I was like, you're kidding me. Like, this is amazing. And I saw one and I said, this looks like that guy that I've been reading about. And there was a man there who later became my boss. His name is Denham. And I asked him, I said, is this a Nick Westerman knife? And he was like, yeah, it is. And he kind of disappeared for a minute. I didn't think anything of it. And people started coming out and talking to me that I didn't know, and asking me weird questions. And within the hour, they asked me if I wanted to travel with them to be on their hand tool event staff, which meant that we'd travel the country. We're from all over. There was maybe 12 of us. And we would meet up in cities all over the country and teach people hand tool woodworking. And I knew that would give me the thing I've been looking for, of not only a way to make money, but I would learn a ton, and I would meet people. Like, you know, connecting with people is a really big part of not only feeling like part of something, but also to become more of the thing you're looking for to like create. Because sometimes it's really hard to create something from the negative of being like, I know it's not that, and I know it's not that. If you can have something modeled for you and see it, it's so much easier to aim at it. And I realized that this green woodworking world was huge, and it had been happening for a long time. And there were people doing things that I didn't even know were possible with wood. And it opened up so much for me. And I worked with them until 2017. And I sort of explained the part about the student loans and the sort of the trials and tribulations and the difficulties with my family, because the stress of that brought on illness. And for like 10 years, I've been dealing with autoimmune disease. That's definitely been brought on by it was very intense and sustained stress. And I had to stop traveling with Lie-Nielsen, and for most other events, teaching or anything. As soon as I got it felt like, you know, a little foothold, I had to pull away because I just couldn't do it. My body couldn't do it anymore. And And it was heartbreaking, but it was also like sort of familiar territory, being like, okay, well, I can't do that, but what can I do? And so I was like, well, I'm going to kind of, you know, gun it. I'm going to do the thing that I've always wanted to do, which is more sculptural stuff, because I started doing more sort of utilitarian forms. And I started branching out and doing more sculptural vessel forms. And that to me was like when it really hit home of like, okay, there's also so much more. Just, I thought it was going to be a really sort of niche thing, but it ended up being very expansive for me, because I hit upon the thing I really wanted to be doing. And I'm sort of grateful for the constriction and the limitation, even though it was incredibly difficult. And if I had to choose to do it that way again, I would not. But it definitely helped me. It was a more expedient way of finding exactly what I wanted to do, and to sort of help me prioritize what it was that I really wanted to be creating and really wanted to be doing. Because I had to ask myself these really big, deep questions. I was very much forced to, so in a way it was a gift of saying, get your priorities right. You've got a couple chances here, and like, you want to be doing what you really feel in your gut is what you should be doing. And so I just started producing more sculptural work, and texturally I started exploring a lot more, and I started thinking more about my relationship to utility and usefulness. And personally, but that wasn't my family, of being from the kind of family that I was from. That's how I got my work, was being the one who could like fix stuff. And so I was really attached to this, like vessels in particular, or spoons. But I felt it was very important for me personally and artistically to really explore what it meant to be something beyond that. And I liked that that I wanted them to live in the same space, in the same forms. I didn't, even though I see myself going in purely sculptural spaces with my work, it's really important to me personally to be able to fuse those two and to reconcile. That's the perfect word. Rarely does that happen where you're like, that is the word, reconcile, that safety in a pattern of being useful, and only having my worth be seen, and only being valued in how much I could give, whether that be in my family dynamic or working a service job where you're doing, as we all know, especially now in the pandemic, you're doing really, really important, hard things that people don't necessarily value. And I was given a good old dose of what it meant to do really hard things, and have sort of like this like weird secret, you don't just like blurt this stuff out about like what you have to go through on the daily to get through. And so I started to realize like how important it was, and how much and I still want to, I still live in that space of wanting to produce more work and inspire conversation and thought around multiple realities, of multiple things can be true at the same time. And that's something I'm learning on my own, even though I've cognitively known that. It's something now I'm like actually digesting and internalizing in my own self, of how to inhabit that space. And I think by creating things with my hands, like that conduit, that direct conduit of creating it and looking at it and living and conceiving it outside of myself, helps me to like bring me closer to understanding how I can do it in my day-to-day life. I really, really enjoy that it's a familiar form, like doing it in bowls. To me, coming from like a a working class background of something that people see and that they're familiar with, I think is a much more accessible route to get them to see something differently. And I'm still sort of grappling with what it means in terms of accessibility when you're creating objects that clearly take a lot of work and will cost a lot of money, and who that work is for. And even and how there's discrepancy between who I want to see it, but who will actually get to own or have or share space with these items. And I don't have the answers for that, and it kind of tears at me. But I am very much in that space now of asking myself those really big questions. And of course, the last few years have only heightened all of those, you know, the desire to understand more about how I relate to all those things. And not just myself, but like my background, my view of the world, and how I can do that on my own, not just asking that of other people, but asking that of myself. And, you know, of course, as I'm creating work that beckons sort of, you know, a discourse on accessibility, and some of them are very expensive, but it's also honoring my work and my worth, and what's seen as sort of like a, you know, a physical labor. It's an incredibly labor intensive process. And sometimes I think people aren't aware of that, even though it really my work bears the marks of that, which is another reason why I like texture so much, is that it shows the history of the person creating it. And it shows quite literally like the force it takes to make that object. But I've been really struggling with that accessibility component, and different avenues that I could take, different avenues that other people have taken, whether that be public art or other ways of viewing things. I think that there's so much that I don't know, and so much that I haven't considered. And the other part of this is that because I've had to take a step back because of my health, it separates me from the community so much. And it's really hard to have all this, you know, by yourself. That doesn't work, you know, that doesn't, that's not a good way to sort of deepen an understanding of what the concepts I've been talking about. And it can be really hard to do that, even though we're doing this over Zoom. This is fantastic. You know, there's so many people I can reach talking about these things than I would be going to actual events. But it is really, really hard to feel that disconnectivity when all I really crave is the connectivity. So I wrote this book, and it came out last year. And to me, that was one way where I felt like I could create some sort of access point for other people who were seeking to at least create it, not just collect or view these objects and these vessels, but who actually wanted to carve them. I didn't know of a good resource to do that. And I also found that in my own search for information early on, when I just didn't have a lot of ways to get that information, when I would get a book or something, it just left a lot of blank, like a lot of gaps. And I wanted something that someone could take home. And of course, it wouldn't answer all of the questions, but that it would be comprehensive enough that someone could use it as a launching pad for exploring what they wanted to do with wood carving. And I'm really happy with how it came out. It was incredibly difficult because it came at a really bad time. I was just about to do the photography on it when the pandemic hit. I wasn't actually planning on doing it. It was someone else that was coming, and they had to cancel. And so I decided to take all the photography on myself. I didn't know how to work my camera. I had just bought and I was like, okay, here's the familiar territory. Let's figure it out. And I look back and I'm glad I did it, but it almost broke me. It was bad. It was bad. It was like it. But I'm very happy with the way it came out. I'm very happy with the response I've gotten from it, because this isn't a book for me, like and it was really important that I heard from people that it was doing the thing that I really wanted it to do, which was to help other people who didn't have the resources to go to a class and learn this hands-on, or who maybe wanted to even see if they liked this enough, or thought it was, could actually try it out before they took the jump, because that's a ton of money, to miss work, to travel, to pay for the class, to pay for lodging and food while you're away. That's an incredible expense for a lot of people. And I think it makes it a lot easier if people can sort of get their feet wet, get the book, see if it's something they're even interested enough to take a class, and it helps them sort of, at least that's what I've heard, to get a little bit closer to where they want to go. I don't have any plans for any other books. I just read my first book since putting that out, because I couldn't even read after that. I couldn't even read. I was so spent on words, especially when they're all your own. Like, not poo-pooing my writing. It's just like, oh my God, it's really a hard task to just read your own writing again and again and again and again and again. But I have it here. I sort of wanted to give people a little visual who haven't seen it. This is what it looks like. And I worked with Maddie Hinckley. They're incredible. If you don't know them, please look them up. They do sculptural woodworking, but also studied furniture at the Krenov School. So it was really important for me to bring on someone who was also a woodworker, so that there was like a baseline of understanding where, I didn't have to fill in a ton of blanks. And then they were also able to help me say, like, this doesn't really make sense, which, it's really good to have that sort of sounding board. To give a little, like, I wanted to be able to give people a way to look at things and be like, what's possible? Like, if I have one chunk of wood, people would say, like, I don't have the means to even get wood. I have like one chance. I have this one piece of wood. How do I best make that into something? And that's kind of who I was thinking of when I wrote this. I was thinking of of someone who was in a similar circumstance, who didn't have a lot of money and didn't have the means to take a class or go to school. And I wrote it for them. I wanted to do it from the vantage point of, like, I want to fill in all those sort of the gaps and the blank spots, and also give people sort of like where the pitfalls were. I found in a lot of like craft instruction, it was sort of like, this is what you do, and this is what you do, and then this is what you do, and here's the result. And my work and how I operate just in my own carving is that I wing it. Like, a lot of times I have a general idea. I'll do little models, but it's a constant conversation with the wood, because it's a natural material. There are so many things that you can't predict. You can know the material and understand sort of in a very basic way, like how it may behave, but it will always surprise you. It'll always, sort of snap back at you at some point. And I just wasn't seeing that in craft instruction in a book form, where it was like, so when you're doing this, this is a common thing that happens. You want to do it like this, not like this. And that one I felt like was like as best as you could, close as you could get without being in person. Because of course, nothing can really trump that, where someone's watching and seeing exactly what you're doing and specific to your situation, and your approach to the material, like how you could change things. I also included a self-care chapter, which I've never seen in a woodworking book or craft book that I know of. Like I said, this is incredibly labor intensive, and a lot of people have to bow out after not very long because of either carpal tunnel or just general injury. And the irony of this is that I actually had to do some of my photography of the self-care chapter while I was injured. And there's one stretch in there where I'm like red in the face. I'm like, oh, because I couldn't do it. So that was a little funny. And some of them are really obvious and others aren't. And it's a lot of things that I just learned about my body in doing this kind of work. And I just think in general of knowing that, and I guess this ties into like the utility thing and like utilitarian objects of like, I do not seek to emulate a machine. I don't want to produce on a level that would require me to significantly compromise my well-being. I've done that enough. And I think in the society that we live in, we've done collectively enough of that. And I think that there's just so much more room for more joy, more pleasure. And I think that's also what I seek to embody in my work, where people see things. And I have to say, Maddie, when they came to they visited maybe right before the pandemic. And one of my earliest bowls was on the kitchen table and they ran right over it. And it was just like, phew. And I was like, that's the biggest compliment you could ever give me, because it's like you're smiling. You just wanted to touch it. Like you've done the very thing that I've always wanted people to do, not just to like, oh my God, your work is so amazing. I'm not looking for the adoration. It's more of like their own conversation with it. Like, what is it that's happening within you? And I just think there's so much more room for that. And people don't even know that they're missing it. And when to bring it back to what I was saying before, it's so hard to develop something from the negative when you don't have something that, like that scarcity mindset of like, there isn't this and there isn't this and there isn't this. Sometimes you don't even know what's possible until it's modeled for you, which is why representation is so important. And when someone can make an object or make a thing where you're like, wow, something else is like awakening in me, I feel like the thing that happens most often is that you then embody it enough to pass it on to the next person who just needs to be reminded a little bit. I think we all possess that, like as an innate characteristic of the human condition. We've just forgotten. And I hope that my work reminds people that there's more, but it also can hold all your oranges, like this is, there's
Danielle, with
yeah.
that, I think that takes us right into, let's see some of your joy.
Okay.
Let's take a look at some of your work and let's feel that joy coming out of the screen. And also the fact, yes, it can hold oranges and apple.
So this is just like the shop page of my website. The lunar bowl, this one right here is the one I say most recently finished. I actually carved it 2 years ago and I stared at it for 3 years and I was like, something right here. And then I recarved the entire surface because it had oil on it. And then I inked it all. And then I was like, there we go. There it is. I love it. I'm so taken with it. If I want to be on that ride too. It's almost like someone else made it and plopped it in front of me. I'm like, that's cool. This is more of the sculptural, avenue that I've been exploring, the intergalactic bowl, where these huge, sort of like deep ravines in between each of the legs. And that was sort of spurred from work that looked more like this, where I was doing these legs. See if I even have a picture like this right here. And I was like, I think I can go further with that. I want to see where I can take that. And that's sort of where this one was born. That was another pandemic bowl. It took me like 2 years to finish. And all of that end grain. So all of this is end grain and all of this is end grain. It was tough. And so I just let myself very slowly sort of go through it. This is more of the purely sculptural work that I've been doing. I hope that I can take this to a larger scale and do more like outdoor installations, maybe like garden sort of art. I don't know how receptive people will be to like natural decay. I also kind of want to paint them with moss and see how that goes. And then I have some spoons, not a lot. They're not my favorite thing to make. They're also incredibly labor intensive and they really hurt my hands. So I just don't do them a lot. I did more sculptural spoons earlier on, and that scratched more the itch for me. I've been doing more of these sort of like straight up spoons, but I don't do them very often because they are so hard on my hands. And then just texture, like all of these sort of, this sort of radial pattern into the middle of the bowl, I really enjoy doing. What else do we have here? This is getting into a little bit older work. I did a bunch of, let's see, I don't have them up here, but I think in my gallery I do, where I did these, what I called creature bowls, and they have these funny little feet. And that was another thing when I sort of had to pull away from traveling and what I knew to be teaching. I got a ton of teaching offers that I had to turn down. And so this was the way I kind of honestly dealt with it, was to just let myself go to the far expanse of like what was possible, what I could do with that material. And I started doing these feet and called them creature bowls. And they seem to sort of have a little bit of mobility. They walk a little bit. I really like that play. I like the sort of like a vessel as a take on sort of like a traditional feminine form, and then also sort of the attraction repulsion dynamic that's there of like there's no in between. You're either useful or you're not, and how you can be sort of both creature like and like creepy crawly, but also can you hold all this stuff for me? So I really liked playing with that, with those creature bowls. I've been doing some wall art. This was from a few years back. If you've been following my Instagram stories, I've been doing smaller ones, like maybe only less than maybe like 8 inches by 4 inches, little guys with really deep texture. Trying to create a variety of price points and also keeping it sculptural, because I feel like when you think of sculpture, you think of museum, you think of something you can't have. And I want it to be something people can have, or at least are more likely to be able to afford. And so I'm trying to create a variety or a range of price points, but also doing something that calls to me. And that took a really long time to figure out where that intersection was. I've been exploring color, and sometimes I feel like I'm so all over the map, and it can be really hard with something like Instagram where you feel like you are synonymous with a brand. And I'm like, no, I'm me, and this is me. All of it is me. This is kind of what I'm letting people in on, is like what's going on in my head, and this is all it. This is the color and the texture and sculpture and some blurry mix between functional and sculptural, and it's all there. I'm sure a branding manager would have some other thoughts, but right now this is kind of what it looks like.
Well, I think everything looks very connected and it's amazing work. And I just want to let you know, Nava says in the chat here, writing about Cy Twombly's work, John Berger described his mark making as landscapes of foreign and yet familiar terrain. That seems to resonate in your work too.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it really does.
Mm.
Nava is asking, when do you decide that an object needs color? And when do you decide to let the material be as is?
Mm. Another sort of green woodworking. So you're working with the material when it's still wet and it needs to dry out. And so it gives me time to sort of like live with the piece. And I've really learned to invite changes very late on in the game. And I've also learned that that is a time of like a little gift of time where I can just sit with it, watch it, look at it, and understand it more of how it interacts in different light, how it interacts in different rooms. So I can put it all around. And when I can see it in that from that many angles, it helps to give me a little bit more of an idea. Sometimes I'm just feeling like I'm in a colorful mood and I'll paint everything. And most times though, I'm having like that really long, slow conversation as a piece is drying, which is actually what I was doing today. And sometimes I'm just down there looking at like, just like every which way. And I realize I'm sitting there for 20 minutes just thinking. I've been really enjoying the ink too. So I'd never considered, black too much until somehow ink did it for me. Paint didn't. I did a few in black paint, but ink seemed to be more of the like calling me for that hue. It's also, I've been sort of limited by, I would really like to keep low VOC products in my work. And of course that can be tougher to get the sort of shades that I want. Like I want, just pops of color, and that can be really difficult. I've been using artist oils for the colors that I, really want to see. But before I was using sort of like spray enamel. That was really fun because it was giving me that glossy, like, you almost want to like ding, ding, ding. So sometimes it's a limitation of that sort of dictates it. And also in my sort of medical health stuff, I've become incredibly sensitive to scents and chemicals. So it's not only for me, but other people where I can't use stuff that's really potent. It just puts me into outer space like instantly.
Craig's asking, he says, it doesn't look like you signed your work, or do you?
Yeah, it's funny. I forgot that I stopped. I used to, and then I stopped, and I don't know why. I have no good reason. It was not conscious, but interesting still to be like, when did that stop? I don't know. People have asked me when they buy something, they'll send me a message and ask me if I can sign it, and I have no qualms with that. Like I'm not steering away from it. Usually I do like a little DRB, like lowercase d, and with wood carving I carve into it, so I don't actually write on it, I'll carve into it. And it has like this cool little sort of symmetrical look because the D and the B, are opposing, and then a big uppercase R in the middle. So maybe that's that. Maybe I'll start doing it again because someone said that. Oh, that's my cat being like, I'm so hungry, you never feed me. Ever.
Nava, do you want to talk a little bit more about how you've never heard a wood artist talk about light?
Well, I wrote in the chat just what Katie just said, that I might be mistaken, but this is the first time that I can recall that I've heard an artist whose chosen material is wood talk about light. Usually discussion is around, sort of more sensual character of wood, whether it's weight or scent, or of course, as sculpture artists, we talk about form, but light is generally a more painterly concern. So I was hoping you would unpack that a little bit.
I think texture came first and then came light. And I realized that texture came first as a very tactile way to relate to my work, and to also free myself of the things that I was feeling, but still have them be there, because I felt like so much I was told to hide all of the things that had happened to me. And I really wanted my objects to wear them, so I felt like that was a piece of it where it was like, no, I want it to look rough. Like I shouldn't have to, the only part of me you want is the cleaned up, polished part. That's really tough to swallow. Like, you want me to be better, like I say this collectively as like messages I get just sort of societally, when you've been dealt a really wild circumstance like I was, I find that people only really want you at the end of it. I really want you to sort of get through that and like give me like the little package at the end. And I was like, I kind of want to give you all the texture in between. Not to say that I want to make sure I'm not misdirecting sort of my own struggle or my own dealings with how to get through that and how to heal. But I don't think I should have to hide this. And I think that's in ways where I had to, or I felt like I was pressured to, or wasn't accepted, or it was sort of looked down upon. I feel like I put it all into my work, and that's why texture became such an important part. And then I think light came into that. And I think that that's so interesting. And I'm not even sure I've made the connection really of like that darkness being met with light. And I was also thinking a lot about it in the garden sculpture idea of light comes to me first, of like what time of day and when. And I think it's because I was also a gardener at one point. And so I always had to consider like, when I put this plant here, at what point, what time of year will this be getting light? And I think the same, I bring that to sculpture and I say, this is going to look different. This is going to feel different seasonally. And when will it look like this? And then also we get such drastic seasons up here in Maine that I want to know what it looks like every season. Like I want to think about that. Like, how's it going to look like in a stark winter landscape? Like, and so I think light, because the horizon line's so different up here, in February than it is in June. And so texture really was like the impetus for light, of seeing it and how it bounced off and how it attracted both me and other people. Really, when you're talking about texture, you're talking about light inherently.
Thank you for such a thoughtful and in-depth answer, and so much candor. I feel very honored by your answer to that question. And just to second what you just mentioned about texture and light, Nishay wrote in the chat something important about how light changes how we perceive texture. And so that really aligns with how you ended that sentence. And so your thinking aligned. And of course, we have I think humanity has a long tradition of dividing narratives into darkness and light as maybe opposing forces, but maybe in your work you use both of them for good.
I would like to think, I would hope. I love having conversations like this too. And I think, speaking about that connectivity thing of like just having someone say something like you did and being like, wow, I'm already having this, I'm making this connection now. It's just something that you mentioned and I've been doing it and it's been there and I just never put it together, I love that. I'm grateful for it.
Oh, well, thank you. And also Albert importantly mentioned David Pye, who has inspired many, many people working in material as well as in the craft theoretical discourse at large, and he wrote that that David Pye believed that texture allows light to create visual patterns. And you certainly see connections between your work and David Pye's carved pieces. Yes.
I'm like looking through all the comments now and just, because I wasn't before when I was talking. I was trying to stay focused. It's so hard for me. And it's just so, you made so many, and you included Maddie's, you guys did a great job. This is wonderful.
Absolutely. We have to.
This is wonderful.
You are a huge part of your book.
Yeah, you've done such an amazing job keeping up when I was just like looking off into the sky and trying to keep my thoughts in a sort of linear.
So I do have a question from Rebecca, and she's asking, what tools do you recommend for someone starting out with green woodworking?
I think at first you have to ask yourself on what scale, like in size wise, like what you're looking to do. From an accessibility standpoint, spoons are a great way to do that. And really you only need like a hook knife and a straight knife. If you got blanks from someone, because a lot of people are selling them now, you can just go right from there. And then an axe would be like a carving axe would be the next one. And that's probably going to be one of the biggest expenses, but the carving knives they have a pretty good range of prices, but for a beginner, those three things right there will get you pretty far. Ooh.
Rebecca says thank you.
You're very welcome. And you can email me too if you have more questions. If you want to get more details or recommendations of makers in particular, feel free to email me.
To follow up on that question, what would you recommend to somebody who's inspired to pick up carving tools and a block of wood and just dive into it? What kind of expectations should somebody starting out have for themselves?
I have told people in the past who have asked this question that I think it's most important to let yourself, not even let yourself, but anticipate that you will be bad, and welcoming that as like a very, not even like as like, I feel like it's always like a means to an end of like, I'll be bad and then I'll get it all out of the way and then I'll be, it's like, no. It's like, it's all really the same thing. It's just let yourself have fun. It's so hard to say that and then do it. I know that. And especially when you've got one piece and you're just like, I just wish I could make something cool for my mom. Let yourself be bad, because then if you think, well, this is going to be really bad, usually it turns out a little bit better, or there's like one little nugget in there, and it's sort of like the same paperclip game. You take that little nugget, that thing you really liked about it, and you say, can I recreate that in the next one? And then you build on that. And that's kind of how you sort of like build your voice, is that. And also some people really thrive in that sort of open-ended way of doing things. And then some people really thrive on repetition, or I think copying work is just part of that process for some people of like, I know this form, I like this form, I'm going to see what it takes to create it of someone else's work. And then you do that, and as you're doing that, you find out what pieces really speak to you and are more of you, and then you sort of use that to build. And sometimes that can be contained in one piece if you really let yourself go slow. I would also say, don't be afraid to cut some stuff off. If you don't like it, just get rid of it. That's how I work. It's like someone's like, what are you doing? You make a mistake. I'm like, I cut it off. And then I say, what's left? Which is what I've done with my whole life. Like things have really not gone well. And I say, okay, well, what can I do? And then I've come up with some of my best designs from that, because I never would have thought of them. I just let myself be in that space of like, oh no, oh no, something really bad just happened. I put that thing away too. Like I stuck that thing away and I let it marinate. And then I just do something I know is going to work out, just so I can boost my own ego. and then I go back to it. That's what I do. Yeah, you're hearing the kitties. That's Baby. Her name is Baby. My name is last name is Bird. Her name is Baby Bird. She's very hungry. She's withering
we
away
love,
behind
we
me.
love the kitties. As we were talking about in our run through.
No,
I just
I
want
do.
to add, and Craig put in the chat, and I think you saw this, that to be good at something, be bad at it first. And
Yes.
it's so true. And it is so hard because I think that we're in that Instagram culture where we're expected or thinking that we have to be perfect all the time.
Mhm.
And
It's so hard.
that's not real life.
Yeah.
This has been extremely inspiring. I want to thank you for taking the time and sharing your experiences, your life, your work, your aspirations with us tonight. This has been truly a treat. So thank you for spending your Thursday evening on a beautiful evening in Maine with us. We hope that this is not the last. This is our first talk with you. We look forward to working with you in the future. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I just really appreciate also the opportunity to share more. I don't think I've had the space to do that before. And it's really fed a lot of my work. So I'm very happy to be talking about it in a more comprehensive way. So I appreciate the opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much, and for your generosity and candor. That's so important when talking about how careers get built.
Mhm.
And it also gets overlooked, and it's very brave to do that. So I very much appreciate the time you spent with us. Also, your book is available to our public in our library. So if somebody wants to come visit and take a look, you can.
Wow, that means a lot to me that it's available with you. I love that. Thank you.